I was looking at the notes on this when I was going through it last night, and I realized that this series is almost 11 years old, which is fascinating because a lot of the information, although it's been upgraded, they're upgrades. You'll get it later. Anyway, it has been upgraded, but it's just as relevant. As a matter of fact, I find it more relevant now than it was the first time. A lot of people didn't get it the first time, although a lot of it is bouncing through your heads and you're figuring out now, oh my goodness, that's what's happening? But just as warning, there is an event coming that will change the world as we know it. After this day, when it comes, nothing will be the same again. And it is best that we prepare for it now rather than wait for it to come and then scramble and try to figure out how to get right. Satan will be banished from any access to heaven and will be forced to remain on the earth, this earth that he has corrupted so completely. You'll find that event as you drop anchor in Revelation, the 12th chapter, the 7th verse. Revelation, the 12th chapter, the 7th verse, where it says, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels warring against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels warred, but did not prevail. Nor was place found for them in heaven anymore." In other words, after this event happens, he will no longer have access to heaven. So he will be forced to live, how did he say? He's going to have to live in the stink he made down here. Verse 9. "And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives, present perfect, the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." In the midst of the coming tribulation, Satan will be cast out of the heavenlies and will be free to roam the earth. This will be a happy time for the heavenlies and those who are in heaven by the blood of the Lamb, but it'll be a time of terrible trial for Israel, and it'll be a time of eternal woe for those who will submit to the mark of the beast. The only salvation in those days will be bold confession of faith in the blood of the Lamb, which will mean, most likely for those who fall to that, martyrdom. To all except those who are sealed for physical preservation. We're already seeing the initial stages of this new world order, and its evil is all around us already. Like a matrix, it has pulled a cloak over our eyes to blind us from the truth that we have heard from the word of the Almighty. A worldly truth, however, that spits in the face of God. Satan has intervened, as always, and convinced us that the world that he has corrupted is true, and God's word is not true. And all of his errant design is the only true reality. That's what he wants you to think. But his designs have one plan in mind: to kill us, steal our destiny as future rulers with Yeshua, and to destroy us all leaving the world to those he has designated as his new rulers of his grand new world. The plan of Almighty God is that we will have life and have it more abundantly. Having that life eventually culminating in a life that never ends. Some may not believe that, but that is the plan. And we will have his same powers as he does. And we will have the capability of operating and creating on the same plane of existence that Messiah is now working on. Many believe when you say something like that, that it is blasphemy. But it is not. It is truth. Satan wanted this ability for himself and is highly upset that one day we humans will have it. And he will have lost it. Thus, he has created an alternative world and has completely wired us all into it, whether we realize it or not. Most accept it because it's all that we've ever known. It's all that our parents ever knew. It's all their parents ever knew. For generations back. Consequently, these lies are accepted without even questioning them. And anyone who dares attempt to uncover this truth is branded as either a liar, a conspiracy theorist, insane, or some other dismissive terms that they use nowadays. The truth was known at one time. In the beginning, there was only one faith. It was adhered to at one time. But Satan convinced Eve that it wasn't true, and she accepted his argument. Satan told her lies disguised as the truth. She and Adam accepted these lies, replacing God's truth in their minds. So understand that any information that will counter Satan's matrix of lies must be biblically correct. It must be honest. And it must completely line up with all of the information contained in the Bible. A lot of theory and a lot of prophecy that you hear doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from between somebody's ears. That doesn't make it true. Might make it very interesting. Doesn't make it true. We must think of the Bible and all of the truth contained in it for our purposes here as the red pill. For our purposes, Satan's lies and corruptions are the blue pill. Now, if you take the blue pill, you go on with your life in its current state, nothing ever changes, and eventually you die, never knowing God's truth until you're resurrected. If you're baptized and take the blue pill or Satan's lies, you will be lost. Unless you repent of these sins and make it through the tribulation. And sometimes if you make it, sometimes it doesn't mean you're going to live from the outside. Whole different concept. We'll get to it. All who go through it as prophesied, however, at least those who accept the truth of God, will make it through. You may not make it through alive, but you will come up in that first resurrection if you repent and make it through that. Those who accept Satan's lies will have a difficult time digesting the truth of God because it'll go against everything you hear in the world out there. Now, the red pill will uncover the seeds of Satan's lies. In other words, the beginnings of it. Now, the question at this point is, which pill do you want to take? The blue one or the red one? Which one do you want? If you want to take the blue one, I just go sit down and we do nothing for the next 8 weeks. If you take the red one, you'll find out what's really going on in this world. You'll find out how deep Satan's little rabbit hole goes. Much of the world around us is simply not what it seems. So the question is, how many want to take the blue pill? How many want to take the red pill? Let's see some hands. Okay. Last time I checked, we were still in America, and although they don't go by their own rules, the majority wins. We take the red pill. So for our purposes, these sermons will be categorized into 8 areas of the world where the outward appearance of these issues and things seems to be positive, seems to be helpful, and seems to be good for us. Yet, each point from its inception has been carefully calculated to lead you astray from the truth of God, and ultimately will destroy us mentally, preparing us to take the mark of the beast and lose. These 8 areas are, number 1, and this will be dealt with today, diversity and gender fluidity. Why was Sodom destroyed? What were the origins? Number 2 will be leadership. Who is in charge? God or the government? Number 3, religion. There is only one true religion. All others are false religions, and they have a satanic purpose. We don't like to think that way because we like to think that we all believe that there is a God. But we're finding out more and more every day that that isn't necessarily the case. Number 4, education, higher learning. We're going to separate education from indoctrination so we know the difference. Number 5 will be news and media information. What is true? Who decides what we know and how much of it is completely hidden from us? And we might get into some of that. Number 6 will be health and nutrition. Elohim promised us 70 years. All of a sudden, people are dying in their teens, 20s, 30s. Why? Is it our food? Is it killing us by design? We'll find out. Number 7, the planet. Third rock from the sun. Are we the only ones? Are we alone? Is there life elsewhere? I'll tell you, give you a little hint. We aren't alone, but it's not what they think. Then we get to number 8. Who is Satan? He says he doesn't exist. We're going to unmask him and reveal his master plan. But our first trip into this matrix of lies will seem to be the most stinging because it's the topic most debated in the world today, and in error, most of it. It's the most lied about because the truth has been hidden so thoroughly and most refuse to deal with it honestly. It is the easiest thing in the world to be proven false, yet it is the hardest to get others to see clearly because of the endless celebrities, news readers, backers, and those who agree with this lifestyle in the nation. Everyone on television and in the media seems to champion their rights. and no one dares question them. Yet there are serious questions, more solid answers, and a necessity for fairness is a must in order to deal with this situation without hate, without lying, and with complete honesty. For it is only through a dismantling of the lies can we come to deal honestly with the world in telling this truth. Only the truth, however, will set any of us free to see this subject clearly. What am I talking about? Homosexuality, gay marriage, transgenderism, and marriages of any of those. And to note, if anyone here has issues or problems with their children hearing about that subject, now would probably be a good time to find something else for them to do. But I don't think that's going to be necessary because we're going to deal with it honestly, but it will not be graphic. It will not be graphic. But I need to deal honestly with the situation as it stands in order to make it clear biblically and do it without the much bandied about hatred. Disagreement does not mean hate. If you've already bought into that, you're already lost. Now, are we ready to go on? All right then. Let's know, first of all, that these lies are prevalent. They're the most powerfully presented lies going on at present, and most weak believers and those who maybe, for whatever reason, feel that they need to defend family members or friends in ignorance are falling more deeply in line with these lies every day. The lack of Bible study by many has led them to accept Satan's lie that Yeshua, well, they probably say Jesus, but they say that he never said anything about homosexuality in the New Testament. This is sophistry at its finest and does not work on people who know that Yeshua was the God of the Old Testament. Deeper study reveals this, and the lie is well told by weak, milk-fed Christians who don't read, who don't study, who don't pray, and do believe the lies of the world and go along with them so as to appear politically correct. We're not here today to be politically correct because we are not politicians. But we will, however, keep the peace. But if you are a child of God, if you're a child of Elohim, you have to recognize sin as sin. The facts are easily proven in the Word of God. And don't worry about whether it was in the Old Testament or the New. We'll prove all of that. Because the fact of the matter is, if he said it once, it's for all time. Let's get started. It's very simple. Won't take long at all. Leviticus, the 18th chapter, the 22nd verse. Leviticus, the 18th chapter, the 22nd verse, where it says, "You shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination to Elohim," or to God. Pretty simple, huh? Now, some people, however, will say, well, maybe that was a mistake. Maybe it's not anywhere else. Leviticus, the 20th chapter, the 13th verse. Leviticus, the 20th chapter, the 13th verse. If a man also lies with mankind as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. And some people, hey, that's not a sin. Hold on. That word abomination is Hebrew 8441. Hebrew noun. Something disgusting morally, That's something that is an abhorrence, especially idolatry or an idol. An abominable or horrible thing. Things considered a sin by God. So, an abomination isn't a sin. Oh, but it is. Oh, but it is. If a man also lie with mankind as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be on them. Now, some people, when this is where it gets kind of sticky, feel like, oh, we want to kill them now. This isn't a theocracy anymore. Therefore, you don't have that option, but you've got roving bands of youths that feel like they want to go out and beat somebody up just because they're gay or transgender, or heck, these bullies nowadays will beat you up if you have a lisp. It's ridiculous. But it's wrong. And it's time for the church to stand up and tell them that it is wrong. But at the same time, you have to be honest about it. But you see, at this point, see how fast that was? At this point, we've already established that homosexuality is clearly a sin for the people of Elohim. But for we who read, this was never in doubt. But those who don't study obviously require different levels of proof before they will accept the truth. Now, obviously, those who do this aren't seeking justification for the behavior. They just want to confuse you by forcing you to justify what they believe is your position, which is actually God's position, but they're not going to point their finger in God's face for obvious reasons. But although admittedly some will do it now, but not forever. But they come to you demanding you to prove it by the New Testament as well. You know, this is this new thing, this what I call half-book knowledge, where they say that the only thing you really have to study is the New Testament. The only thing you have to know is the New Testament. The only thing you have to read is the New. So they say, well, he said it in the Old, but he didn't say it in the New, so we don't have to honor it. And I wonder, what Bible were they reading? Because you see, if you know that Yeshua was the Yahweh personage of the Old Testament, you already know that he's already spoken on this. And there was no need to repeat himself. But the apologists and the scoffers have convinced most of the world that God somehow changed his mind. And throughout all of the commandments and all of the laws that were given in the Old Testament, and all of that stuff was thrown away when Yeshua died on the tree. But because we can do it, we'll be nice. We give them New Testament proof as well, because the book is, if nothing else, consistent on this and all subjects. Let's go to Romans, the first chapter. Romans, the first chapter, the 18th verse. And they made the mistake in asking them to go to the New Testament, and factually, they went to the wrong guy. When have you ever known Paul to soft pedal on anything? Romans, the first chapter, the 18th verse, where it says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because the thing which may be known of God is clearly revealed within them, for God revealed it to them. For the unseen things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being realized by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, for them to be without excuse. Because knowing God, they did not glorify him as God, Neither were thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible Elohim into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. In other words, they made him we're just going to worship it just like the other creatures that we worship. Don't kill an animal nowadays. You might do more time for killing a dog than you do for killing a child. But that's just part of the whole thing. Verse 24, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, for they changed the truth of God into a lie. And they worshiped and served the created thing more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause God gave them up to dishonorable affections. For even their women changed the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another. Males with males, working out shamefulness and receiving in themselves the recompense which was fitting for their error. And even as they did not think fit to give God they didn't even think it fit to give God fairness in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do the thing not right, being filled with all unrighteousness. Notice this: wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, being full of envy, murder. Not just talking about homosexuality anymore, is he? Don't miss this. Murder, quarrels, deceit, evil habits, becoming whisperers or gossipers, backbiters, haters of God, insolent, proud, braggarts, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, unmerciful, who, knowing the right order of God, that those practicing such things are worthy of death, like I said, don't miss this. Not only do them, but have pleasure in those practicing them. If you noticed, in verses 29 to 31, other things, other sins were included in that little list of things that were deemed worthy of death. Murder, envy, quarreling, deceit, gossiping or whispering, bragging, false love, unforgiveness, lack of mercy. But I've never seen anyone chasing someone down the street to beat them up for bragging. Never seen anybody chased down the street, beating them up for envy. Never seen anybody running up and down the street, chasing after somebody. I remember the first time we went to, I think it was Jamaica years ago, and we saw a guy, they were chasing him down the street, running and throwing bricks, and some of them were hitting us. It was pretty brutal. This guy hid in a hotel, and they locked him in, locked himself in, and I walked up to one of the guys and said, "What is it?" He said, "What is it? What's with this guy?" He said, "He is shy boy." In Jamaica, that meant at the time that he was homosexual. Chasing them down the street. They were going to kill him. Things have changed down there too, but it happened here. It still happens here. You've got bands of teenagers that will go out and beat somebody up. There's nothing in that. There's nothing good about that. You're not proving anything. And matter of fact, in a lot of cases, you find out that one or two of the guys who are in that group that's doing the beatings, the reason they're doing the beatings is to take a little attention away from themselves. Be careful. Be very careful. But we have to be honest about this. The beatings are unnecessary. It's ridiculous. There's no point to that. These people are in enough isolation, they have enough problems of their own. They don't need that. There's no necessity for that. But you see, these scriptures prove that weak believers always attack the sin that they're least likely to commit. They'll throw the choir director out, but the pastor might have 3 girls pregnant in the choir stand, and they'll let him stay. Oh, he stepped on toes. I'm going to do more than that before I'm done. We're trying to be real here, so we have to be honest. But this has always been a problem. It's always been a problem. But we are never honest about it. But because we're not honest about it, they feel the need to attack us all. No necessity for that. But if we were more honest, you would have a much firmer ground from which to stand on these things and speak the truth. So it's time to speak the truth. But it just makes us look so hypocritical when we go after homosexuality to the exclusion of all other sins listed plainly by Elohim. This is why the scoffers try so hard to attack us on this point. And they make these weak, silly arguments, like the argument they make that Ruth and Naomi were gay. Yet they can offer no proof. A quick read of the book of Ruth puts that lie to bed very quickly, because it becomes obvious that this was a woman that said, I love you, I'm going to stay with you because we're both in the same, we've lost our husbands. And if you got to understand that situation fully, you understand that back then that meant that you were basically at the mercy of the people around you for a living, unless you were blessed enough to have something to do as a job. But it was ridiculous to make that accusation. But it was done, and it has been done, and people honestly think that there's some truth in that. It's not. But that's not the worst of it. The hardcore scoffers will then point you to David and Jonathan. And they all make it all based on one statement that David made concerning their friendship. Let's go to 2 Samuel, the 1st chapter, 26th verse. 2 Samuel, the first chapter, the 26th verse, where it says, I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant you have been to me. Your love to me was wonderful, more than the love of women. Now, as usual, that's the whole statement that they say. Oh, that proves it right there, they say. They say David made this statement about Jonathan. And he was talking about his best friend and Saul, his father, who were just killed in battle. And David, here in this scripture, very publicly was expressing his grief and loss for his friend in a eulogy. But let's break it down in Hebrew, because as they say, the devil is in the details, which is usually where you can find he and his chicanery and his nonsense. And we can usually find it there and derail it and defeat his lies. Let's go back a little bit. In 2 Samuel, 1st chapter, let's go back to the 22nd verse. It's a good place to start. 2 Samuel, the 1st chapter, the 22nd verse, where it says, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death, they were not divided. Now, that's a fascinating thing that David can say this to a man the day before had just missed him trying to throw a spear and pin him to the wall. That's amazing to me. That's forgiveness, friends. That is forgiveness. Were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and with delights, who put ornaments of gold on your clothes. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of battle? Jonathan is slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant you have been to me. Your love to me was wonderful, more than the love of women. How are the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? Now, let's get into these details. The word love used here is the Hebrew word H160, ahaba, which is the feminine form of the word ahab, which actually in English means affection. A little bit of a back off on that. Now, had the intention been romantic or intended to be something of sexual love, the word used would have probably been the one used in other places. Whenever you run into something like this, you go to other places and see if you find something that's similar that will give you some clarity on what word either was used or should have been used there. The word that would have been used here if this was a romantic entanglement, H1730. Dode. It is always good to check these things out in context. Now, well, how do we know it was that word dode? You got to look for it somewhere else, where it's a more appropriate usage. Where do you find it? A lot of people ask why this book is here. Let's go to one we don't go to too often. Give you a little time to find it. Song of Solomon, 5th chapter, 16th verse. The Song of Solomon, 5th chapter, the 16th verse, where I think we pretty much know what she's talking about here. Song of Solomon, the 5th chapter, the 16th verse, where it says, his mouth is most sweet. Yes, he is altogether lovely. This is my dode, my beloved. H 1730. And this is my friend, H7453, which is the word Raya. This is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. More common usage of words many times makes them clearer in context. We have to remember that biblical English was translated. In the Old Testament, it was translated from Hebrew and Aramaic, and in the New Testament, from Greek, with a few verses of Aramaic. As a result, many of the words used, sometimes they don't jump out at us as the same thing because the usage might have been improper in those who translated because they didn't completely understand what they were trying to say. Because they were just translating the words. Sometimes they knew just enough to get the job done. That's why they had sometimes 100 guys sitting in a room, and they would have 100 guys go through it, and they would go through each one of theirs and check them and make sure, okay, is it okay? Someone would go back and check it all, make sure it was okay. Okay, it's okay, move on to the next set and move those on. That's why there are no errors in these books, because they were checked over and over and over again until they made sure that all of the translations were at least correct based on the original languages. That's why whenever you run into a problem, you have to go back to the original language to find the original intent of the verse. And a lot of people don't do that. The more learned wolves will learn how to try to fool you with linguistic sophistry such as this, making you believe something that is not true. These liars even get confused sometimes. They have so many lies going, they can't keep all the balls up in the air at the same time. One lie that is becoming very common nowadays has Yeshua marrying Mary Magdalene, having children with her. Now, it gets deeper as you go through. You haven't heard the worst of it. They say that he married Mary Magdalene, had children with her, and there's rumor that their descendants, even to this day, live in France. I read this in a book years ago. I bought it, and I'm so ashamed that I bought it now. Until sometimes, if you ever get to my office and look, you'll look for it. You'll be able to find that book, because that'll be the one with the boundary to the inside and the pages into the outside, so you can't see the title. Title is "The Bible Fraud" by a guy named Tony Bushby. Somebody took the notes from that book, and that's where the Bible code books came from and all of that. Just for the heck of it, last night I was reading some criticisms of the book. When the book first came out, everybody jumped all over it. It's so great, it was so wonderful, it's so this. Now the guy is the joke of journalism. That's why you've not heard from him anymore. He had about 8 or 9 books out until he came up with this one. Once he threw this one out, it was like his career was like done. Because once you come up with something this hard to believe, the history is there. And the historians simply go and grab their stuff, and then out come their knives. They carve your nonsense apart. But according to Busby's book and other rumors, the other lie came forward. They say that Yeshua was in a gay love affair with the Apostle John. You'll find their only proof text here, where Yeshua was telling his disciples that he would be betrayed. Let's go to John, the 13th chapter, the 21st verse. John, the 13th chapter, the 21st verse. When Yeshua had said this, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, "Verily, verily, I say to you that one of you shall betray me." Then the disciples looked upon one another, wondering of whom he spoke. But there was one of his disciples leaned upon Yeshua's bosom, the one whom Yeshua loved. Greek, verse 25. Agapeo is the word. Agapeo, which is the singular form of agape. Most of us know what agape means. It means to esteem or value, indicating a direction of the will and finding one's peace or joy in someone or something. It doesn't say anything about romantic love, which is this is a brotherly love, or a caring for someone, caring for something. The word here, had it been used for any romantic involvement, would have been H1735, either dode or G5368, phileo. Love, indicating feelings, warm affection, the kind of love expressed in a kiss. But if they think that you don't know the language, they'll throw that nonsense at you. And some people, see, he was in love with him. This nonsense has been out here for so long now, till very few people even try to make the arguments for eunuchs or anything like that, because they find that they can get more mileage nowadays out of the hate argument. If the churches began to be, as I said, more honest about all sin, and stop singling out the ones you're less likely to commit, this would be an easier road to travel for all of us. The issue has never been hate. It's been ignorance and lack of caring. But Satan has a reason for driving this wedge, and it is important to him. Anything that is important to him, believe me, it's going to be constantly in your face. This is why he has pressed the argument and allowed it to rage on for years. The center of the argument for caring people is not that. It's whether or not you can be born that way. This argument rages on and is more heated, especially after the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriages are legal, at least from a legal standpoint. Now, the U.S. law may think they have resolved the issue, but they have forgotten a very important piece of the puzzle. We can no longer claim to be one nation under God if we don't respect his word on this issue. Notice very quickly what the Bible says about marriage, an institution that was, by the way, set apart and invented by the Almighty himself. And I would think that when we were going to start to use a tool he's put in the toolbox, that we would at least consider his parameters. But quite frankly, that has not been done. Has not been done. To be quite honest with you, it's been ignored. Mark, the 10th chapter, the 6th verse. If you're going to use it, you got to use the book to prove it or disprove whatever it is. Mark, the 10th chapter, the 6th verse, where it says, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them," say it out loud, "male and female. For this cause, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the two of them shall be one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man set apart." The institution was made for a man and a woman. No other alignment is mentioned by Elohim. Thus, he will accept no other. But with the levels of acrimony and fear coming from the church, there may never be a civil discussion of this issue until Yeshua returns to settle it himself. The issue of transgenderism only conflicts the mix even more. All of this has gone off the rails because of a lack of leadership coming from the mental health community. No, he's not going to go there. Hey, they did. Why not? Most psychiatrists have tacitly accepted the ruling of the APA, the American Psychological Association Conference of 1973, declaring homosexuality normal. But maybe we need to go back and look at the history a little bit and look at the climate that led up to that. You see, back in 1970, gay activists protested against the APA convention in San Francisco, yet demanded to have it back there the next year. We won't go there. These scenes were repeated in 1971. And as people came out of the closet and felt empowered politically and socially, the APA directorate became increasingly uncomfortable with their stance. It wasn't a stance, it was just the truth. But all of a sudden, with pressure on them, but let's understand where the pressure came from. The APA directorate became increasingly uncomfortable with their stance of declaring homosexuality a mental illness. In 1973, a year later, the APA's nomenclature task force recommended that homosexuality be declared normal. No argument was made in terms of what and why. They didn't look at the facts. They just looked at all of those wonderful people outside with the protests and the gang. But then it got worse. The trustees were not prepared to go that far. But a few on the committee were threatened with being outed as gay themselves, which back in 1973, that could be the end of your career if it was found out that you were gay. So they got to them behind closed doors and threatened them with being outed. And all of a sudden, the vote came back. And there was a vote to remove homosexuality from the list of mental illnesses by a vote of 13-0, with 2 abstentions. This decision was confirmed by a vote of the APA membership, and homosexuality was no longer listed in the 7th edition of the DSM-2. That's the Diagnostic Manual listing mental disorders and how to treat them, the key. If you're sick, if you have cancer and it's not treated, what's going to eventually happen to you? You're going to flatline. If you have AIDS and you're not treated, what's going to eventually happen to you? You're going to be gone. If you have blood clots and nothing is treated, what's eventually going to happen to you? You're going to have a heart attack. So, if in fact homosexuality is a mental illness and it is not treated, what happens? You just get worse. This is what happened in 1974. As a result, there has been very little research or work on helping men and women who fall into this category. It is accepted as normal now, and few see it any other way. And the folk outside protesting won't allow you to speak of it any other way. Not without much protesting and tumult. Consequently, treatment has been suspended, and those who have worked to make this an accepted behavior appear to have won the day. But the day has not come as yet. Save for Pharaoh's army, the cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, and Zeboim, these have been the only cities Elohim has chosen to destroy because of the excessive sins going on there. Does that mean that he will not do anything? No. It only means that mankind will be allowed to continue in sin. With Satan so obviously behind everything that decimates the births of new humans, I wondered within myself, why is Satan working so hard to keep this gender confusion in play? Wonder, why is he working so hard on this? And then it hit me. Hit me like a ton of bricks. The answer is here. It's right here in the beginning of the Bible. Let's go to Genesis, the 1st chapter, the 26th verse. Genesis, the 1st chapter, the 26th verse. And Elohim said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the heavens, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over all the creepers creeping on the earth. And Elohim created man in his image, and in the image of Elohim he created him. He created them male and female. Did anybody catch it? Did anybody catch it? Got one. Okay, let's go deeper. Let's go back to the first marriage. Let's go to Genesis, the 2nd chapter, 19th verse. Genesis, the 2nd chapter, 19th verse. And out of the ground, Yahweh God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto the man to see what he would call them. And whatsoever the man called every living creature, that was the name thereof. And the man gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for man there was not found an helpmeet for him. And Yahweh caused the deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which Yahweh had taken from the man made he a woman, and brought her to the man. And the man said, wow. This is new bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She should be called woman, or Ishi, because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. There is the answer. They shall be one flesh. The two people become one unit. One mind, strong, focused, able to begin and complete any task without deviation until finished. He is physically strong, able to handle rigorous physical labor. Her mind is meticulous and has a great memory. We talked about that earlier in studies, how they find out how to make, when children are hermaphrodites, they find out how to determine whether they're going to determine whether the child is male or female. And now what do? They do a brain wave test, because they have found out, men don't like to talk about this, like I said, but they find that the female brain works anywhere between 25 to 50% faster than the male brain. Don't trip, it just is what it is. So, whenever they have a child that comes out hermaphrodite, we know what that is, right? Okay. They used to ask the parents, is that what you want? What do you want, male or female? Of course, in most cases, you know what most men wanted. And now and if you really know that truth, you understand why there are so many people walking around today claiming to be transgender. Oh, I am a woman in the body of a man. And they have a good argument, because in a lot of cases they didn't do the brain scan, they just did the surgery. Now you have a hermaphrodite child. They don't even ask you. This is the brain scan, this is what you have. And you just sign off on it, and it works. So since 1971, when this started, there is no one that can claim that they botched their surgery because of this information. This is stuff that most people, oh, well, hey, where'd you hit that? It's very well documented. Very well documented. But this is what Satan was fighting against. He, as I said, physically strong, able to handle rigorous physical labor. Her mind, meticulous, fast, has a great memory, a great capacity to retain details, yet is able to feel, able to empathize, lending insight to every situation. Each person is great on their own, but the two of them together can handle anything. And the two together are a complete unit. They can survive alone. They may do well alone in a worldly sense, but they come alive and shine as a unit when they come together. The whole is more than equal to the sum of its parts. The two of them together are capable of functioning on this physical plane in the same mental manner and as Elohim the Father and Elohim the Son do. Notice both spirit beings together embody the masculine as well as the feminine traits, both together. Here we have Satan one more time imitating God by making a man think he can be a woman, or making a woman think she can be a man and think that they're going to have that combined mind of God. No, but he doesn't want you to have that, because you might get smart enough to dethrone him, but he wants you to think that. So if you think that, you're going to try to be that. And all you got to do is look around the world and see that for all of the acceptance, for all of the everything else, what are the highest suicide rates in the world? Ray didn't say it. That's just the stats. But when you bring these beings together, embodying masculine as well as the feminine traits together at the same time, only God and the Father can do that. However, when you bring together a man and a woman, they have the same capability. They can do the same things physically. Together, they can accomplish any task, so long as they work together. That's why Satan began his destruction of the family unit by appealing to Eve's vanity and challenging Adam's authority. Split them right down the middle. Weakened their marriage and set us all up to die. Never allowing them to achieve the same power on this physical plane that makes the Godhead so amazing on the spiritual plane. Removing the combination and raising gay marriage to its equal. Yet, these marriages will never have the power Elohim intended, and the society will no longer have marriage as its anchor as it has for centuries, because society will fall. Why? Because of the way things are working. You see, a house divided can never stand. It will always fall under the weight of its own competitiveness. You don't believe it? Look at Congress. Oh, the Democrats are this. Oh, the Republicans are that. You're supposed to be working on the same thing, but you can't even work together. Same thing with marriages. Once feminism came in, don't get me started, but at the same time, male supremacy, same thing, dividing. Once you divide something, it's real easy to split it up and destroy it. Very simple, not a problem. Always has been. A house divided will never stand. It will always fall under the weight of its own competitiveness. With two women or two men in a relationship, there will always be contention, as both have the same thought process and will constantly battle at every point of contention. Both will be paranoid, and trust will always be very low because of what you were before you got married. Thus, like two magnets with the same poles, they will always mentally repel each other. And the only real glue will be sex. Psychological studies have proven that a relationship based only on sex will last about, anybody that's done any testing will tell you. How long? Well, I'll tell you, 5 years. You see people, I used to watch it, because this is old information to me. I saw this stuff 25, 30 years ago. And I used to watch people when they would move in together and have like, so I'd be like, and almost everyone, 5 years. And I'm thinking, how do they know this? I don't know how they knew it, but it's real. It's real. Men and women will always meet on some level, however, if they remain close to Elohim and stay away from the lures of Satan's world. And that's including misogyny and feminism. But with the world impacting marriages so negatively on so many levels, the familial destruction seems unstoppable. The constant feminism and misogyny in these TV shows we watch, this awful music we listen to, all of the rap music, you just B's and HOs or whatever, that's all you hear. And the women, oh, I hate you. And you've got all of this feminism out here. It's there to divide. That's all it's there for. All the music, the TV shows, all of the entertainment that is pulling the society apart as Satan's power is weakening it according to his plan. We cannot weaken it further by lacking understanding of what is happening around us. We need to get this information anywhere that we can, and there is an answer to the gay's question. Whether it be gay, lesbian, transgender, all of it has roots in our social environment. Want answers? There is a place. Narth.com, Narth.com. North American Research for the Treatment of Homosexuality. You say that name in most places and you got a duck. But if you go out there and spend some time out there, there are books out there, whole books they've just published out there. They just want you to read them. They just want you to understand. They're not trying to, like, was it Exodus International, where they were kidnapping kids and brainwashing them, and the kids came out as gay as they were when they came in. These people bring you in. What is the problem? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? How do you want to handle this? They're finding out that 80% of people, if you deal with them long enough, 15 to 20 years, they go back to heterosexuality on their own. Narth has done amazing studies on all facets of abnormal sexuality. Some have sought them out, others fight them and try to dismiss their conclusions, but the conclusions make perfect sense. Even if the world doesn't currently want to hear them, they only make sense because they are logical, they're real. Now, I'll give you a short idea of what they've got out there on a couple of subjects, because we don't have the time. On being gay, they talked about a test that they did on twins. Because identical twins are always genetically identical, homosexuality cannot be genetically dictated. Thus, they came to the conclusion, no one is born gay. How do they know this? He notes, the predominant things that create homosexuality in one identical twin and not in the other, therefore must be post-birth environmental factors. What are they talking about? Early childhood rape of one and not the other. Early childhood molestation of one and not the other. One being around a female parent exclusively with no influence from the other, and eventually going into the world and finding no male role models up to a certain time. Does this make you gay? No. It just gives you certain looks that when you go out into the world among people who might be of that, they might see you and start to mess with you, for want of another term. But the final conclusion was that it was the environment that did it. It was the environmental things that happened that set you down that road. It wasn't, you weren't born that way. They say no one is born that way. On transgenderism, the transgendered suffer a disorder of assumption. Like those in other disorders familiar to psychiatrists, with the transgendered, the disordered assumption is that the individual differs from what seems given in nature, namely one's maleness or femaleness. Other kinds of disordered assumptions are held by those who suffer from anorexia and bulimia nervosa, where the assumption that departs from physical reality is the belief by the dangerously thin that they are overweight. Is it a real problem? No, but it is in your mind. So what do we have to do? Work with the mind. So what do you do with the transgendered? Work with the mind. But once you remove treatment, you get Bruce Jenner. Yeah, I said it. You get him in a room with a psychologist long enough, they'll say it too. How to respond? Psychiatrists, obviously, and let's continue this. This is interesting. How to respond? Obviously, psychiatrists must challenge the solipsistic concept that what is in the mind cannot be questioned. Disorders of consciousness, after all, represent psychiatrists' domain. Declaring them off limits would eliminate the field. But will it eliminate the disease? I don't think so. Only gets it worse. Just like that cancer, if you don't treat that transgenderism, they're only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Many will recall how in the 90s, an accusation of parental sex abuse of children was deemed unquestionable by the solipsicists of the recovered memory, which they're finding out now that a lot of these recovered memories were not recovered, but were placed there by less than ethical psychologists who convinced these children that their parents molested them, when in fact it did not happen. You won't hear it from those championing transgender equality, but controlled and follow-up studies reveal fundamental problems with this recovered memory movement. When children who reported transgender feelings were tracked without medical or surgical treatment at both Vanderbilt University and London's Portman Clinic, 70 to 80% of them spontaneously lost those feelings. Once they were treated, wow, now I know what I am. But nobody wants to treat anyone. Because the fact of the matter is, if you can't procreate, you must recruit. Some 25% did have persistent feelings, but what differentiates differentiates these individuals remains to be discerned. In other words, they're still checking it, but they will figure it out. There's a library worth of amazing information to be found at narth.com that you will never hear in the news media. We must avail ourselves of this information. It is amazing, for it is sure that we will encounter people of these lifestyles in our walk with Yeshua. If they come to the church, we will be loving. There ain't no question about that. We will treat them as we would any other sinner who repents and wants to turn to living the way of Elohim. Just as Peter told us in 1 Peter, the 4th chapter, the 1st verse. First Peter, the 4th chapter, the 1st verse. Therefore, Messiah, having suffered for us in the flesh, also you arm yourselves with the same thought, that he suffering in the flesh has been made to rest from sin, in order no longer to live in the lusts of men, but in the will of God, the remaining time in the flesh. For the time of life which is past is enough for us to have worked out the will of the nations, having gone on in lasciviousness, lusts, excess of wine, parties, carousing, and abominable idolatries. In these things they are surprised that you are not running with them into the same excess of riot, blaspheming. But they shall give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. In other words, don't fall back in with them because hey, why don't you party with us anymore? Why don't you do this with us anymore? Oh, no. Let them stay out there. Their day is coming. You don't want to fall back into their day. You've passed that. Leave that alone. Verse 6. For to this end the gospel was preached also to the dead, that they might be judged according to the men in the flesh, but live according to Elohim in the spirit. But the end of all things has drawn near. Therefore be of sound mind and be sensible to prayers. And above all things have fervent love to yourselves, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Didn't say what kind, it said multitude, all. Be hospitable to one another without grudging, each one as he received a gift, ministering it to yourselves as good stewards of the manifold grace of Elohim. If anyone speaks, let it be as the words of Elohim. If anyone ministers, let him do it as of the ability which Elohim gives, so that Elohim may be glorified in all things through Yeshua Messiah, to whom is the glory and the might forever and ever. Let us show the love of God to all of his people as they come to us. And we now know why Satan has attacked so strongly in this area. This knowledge should help us be more caring and help us to be more compassionate rather than fearful or hateful to those who truly want to come this way. Now, there are going to be some that will pretend just to flesh you out, even up to the end, just to sell you out. Oh, they don't believe. We don't worry about that. You'll see that when it comes. You'll know, you'll believe me. God will show you which is which. We must show love to all who genuinely want to live according to the way of God. We already know that the others who do not want to live this way will be dealt with in their due time by the Almighty. All judgment will lead, when necessary, to punishment. And that punishment How did he say it is his? He will repay. Let us be sure in that. And let us love all people and understand that everybody has a cross to bear. And you may have a different one, but we all have one. Next up, the matrix of leadership. God bless you all.